Good evening. Welcome to Progressive Soup. My name is David Stevenson. Emily Volpin-Testa, my co-host, and I have a visit from Lindsay Farrell tonight from the Working Families Party. Lindsay's been on before, and we talked about a little bit about the Working Families Party and what they're up to now. But we're going to take a step backwards tonight, and we're going to hear a little bit about the history of the Working Families Party. Because as the audience know, the Republican Party bloomed suddenly in the 1850s, and look what they are now. I was going to say look where they are now, but that's not a very complimentary thing to say, I guess, though. So, Lindsay, take us back to the beginning of the Working Families Party.
Sure. Well, the beginning wasn't too long ago. Yeah, I don't know how much of a history lesson this will be. The Working Families Party was founded in New York in 1998. With the philosophy that we need to more proactively inject issues that affect working and middle class people into the political debate. Things like raising wages, making healthcare affordable, making housing affordable, bread and butter, kitchen table issues that affect everybody. And we were formed in New York in 1998, as I said. With the philosophy that we were going to use fusion politics, which is this thing where we cross-endorse major party candidates. We're very different in that way from other third parties. Most third parties routinely run their own candidates, knowing often that they're only going to get a small percentage of the vote, 2%, 3%. And ultimately, they have no effect over how the people who do win govern. So we took an approach that we were going to give our endorsement to candidates from any party, whether they are Democrat or Republican or our own, with the expectation that we would be able to push them to govern better once they got into office.
So you hold candidates' feet to the fire, so to speak.
Sometimes we do that. We endorse candidates either for a couple of reasons. Either because they're great to begin with, they're good on the issues that we care about, and they champion working people and middle class people's issues, and we want to make sure that we help get them into office because we want them there. Or they're pretty good on our issues most of the time, and we can use our support to, push them a little bit farther to stand up when it really, really matters for working people and middle class people.
Now, Emily and I, we're on the show together because she was on at the end of last year, and we talked predominantly about health care. Mm-hmm. And she's a licensed massage therapist, very good one. Where does health care fit into the goals of the Working Families Party?
Healthcare has been a very, very high priority for us as an organization, pretty much since we were founded. I should say, I'm talking about how we were founded in New York. We do exist in several states now. We can't exist in every state because, like I said, one of the key components of our strategy is to be able to endorse major party candidates when we want to.
Yeah.
The major parties over the course of the last century and a half have illegalized that in most states. So in 2002 we came to Connecticut, and we now exist in Vermont, Delaware, Oregon, South Carolina, and to a limited extent in some other states that don't have that cross-endorsement. Healthcare has been an important issue in all those states since we founded, and there's some mixed response, obviously, to the healthcare package that passed in Congress recently, but we're overall more happy with it than not, and glad that it passed.
How did you get involved?
How did I personally get involved?
Yeah, I'd be interested.
Sure. That's, I guess,
was it personal motivation or?
Yeah, well, I didn't have anything to do with politics, really. I was a graphic designer out of college, and I got frustrated with looking at the problems that the world had. George Bush was running for a second term at that point, and right. I was so frustrated with the way that healthcare wasn't really being talked about at all at that point. Right. Wages were becoming increasingly low in relation to the cost of living, and I felt like I wanted to be part of the side that was doing something about that. So I started knocking on doors to defeat George Bush for the Working Families Party in New York. back in 2004, and that's how I personally came to this.
Were you still in Italy in 2004, Emily?
Yes, I was.
What did you see in Italy? What kind of chatter was there about the election in America?
Well, at first, and when I went in 2000, people were joking in Italy how we didn't really have a president. I mean, after the election, they'd say, "Oh, haha, you don't have a president. No one knows who the president is," because there was still no one knew. With Florida and the votes, and then I remember election day for the second time Bush got elected, and since I wasn't in the country, it wasn't in the news, I really had forgotten it was election day, and I had friends calling me up, "Oh my goodness, Bush won again, how disgusting," and like it was my fault, they were just horrified. And I remember people telling me, Italian journalists were being killed, and friends telling me, "Emily, we're not fighters, we're lovers, and we don't want this war." And I remember at that point there was a whole thing with the French president pulling out, and everything was anti-French, freedom fries and freedom. So I think there was a deep sense of Americanism, anti-Americanism, and I remember at one point there was a synagogue in this piazza I was living at in Modena, and some guy, he was Jordanian or Kuwaiti, he actually put himself in his car with a propane tank and blew himself up, and it was this huge explosion. So I think there was a lot of anti-Americanism at that time, definitely, in Europe in 2004.
The party system in Italy is a totally different...
Yes, exactly. You can have a million, it seems like it, posters from communists to the Daisy Party to... you could talk a little about that, right? How when there's an election in Italy, you could have hundreds of different parties, whereas here there's the bipartisan system. Would you like to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I mean, Working Families really rarely runs its own candidates. We do sometimes when we've made a calculated decision that it's worth it or that we think that we can win, but usually we cross-endorse somebody from either of the major parties. We didn't necessarily form with the expectation that we would have as many elected officials as the other parties tend to have. Right. We really... we don't want to replace the two major parties necessarily. We just want them to focus on our issues more. Our concern is that at this point we have two parties that stand up for business interests all the time, and no real major party that is accountable to working people first and foremost. And so, we formed to inject those issues into the debate between the two major parties. A lot of people have written books about this and studied this, and there are a lot of theories about this, but the American system is really very different from that because we have these two major parties, and then we have lots of minor parties in this country. It's not that they don't exist. We have the Greens, we have the Libertarians, a whole a rainbow of these different kind of viewpoints, but for whatever reason, they don't seem to really be effective at injecting their top priorities into the political debate that we have, or at least the way that I would say we've begun to have some success with that as the Working Families Party. A couple of examples of that are last summer when we were in the middle of a budget crisis, and we were how many months after we were supposed to have a budget in the state, and the governor was pushing to just cut and cut and cut to solve that problem. Well, we said cuts in our budget aren't the best way to deal with it. Laying off firemen and teachers aren't the best way to fix our economy. And when we cut things from schools, when we cut from healthcare, when we cut from services to elderly, that's almost like it's like a new tax on lower income people. And we would like to push for the wealthier to step up and pay a little more to help fix this problem. And we were able to push for that and ultimately help push through a millionaire's tax for the first time in our state's budget.
You were talking about a little earlier about about not just minimum wage, but about a working, a living wage. Compare the two. What's the difference between living wage and minimum wage?
Yeah. It's exactly what the names say. You know, a minimum wage is what our government has decided is the absolute least that a company can pay somebody, but it actually doesn't have any connection whatsoever to what the cost of living is and how much it is to support yourself and your family. We've pushed for living wage ordinances around New York State and here in Connecticut, and successfully in a couple of towns, that define the living wage based on what the cost of living is locally, the cost of housing in the area, the cost of groceries, all of those things, so that we are defining what we pay people based on what they actually need to get by. And the way that we're able to enforce that is that we link it to companies that have a financial relationship with the city. If they're getting contracts, if they're getting land from the city, if they're getting tax abatements, they shouldn't be they shouldn't be perpetuating poverty. They should be paying the city residents what they need to get by on.
That's a pretty clear definition of it. What about what does a living wage entail? You mentioned about enough money to pay the bills, but what are basic needs that people have?
I think that changes perhaps by family, but I mean, we all know that you need a roof over your head, you need to put food on the table, you need to be able to pay your energy bills, which is becoming increasingly difficult. All families need access to transportation. Education is increasingly an important part of a family budget. And the situation that we're in now is the cost of food, the cost of gas, the cost of electricity, the cost of rent. These things are all going up, and our wages are not. They are not keeping pace. And so, our agenda is to fight to close that disparity.
So the thing you mentioned, really, they truly are subsistence needs of families.
Right. So how is that going? I mean, have you worked on improving conditions for these families?
Yeah, I mean, there are a variety of ways that we can do that. One of the big priorities for the party these days is the push for paid sick time. We're working on legislation that would require businesses of a certain size, larger businesses, to provide at least a few days a year to their employees to take off when they're sick or their child is sick, or to seek preventative care, that kind of thing. It's a way to give a little bit more economic security to low-income and middle-class families who are living paycheck to paycheck and cannot afford to miss pay or even worse, to lose a job just because somebody in the family got sick for a few days.
Right.
Wow. And what does it cost society in general when somebody in a restaurant or somebody in the healthcare profession goes to work sick? I mean,
sure.
What can happen out of that, the evil that can come from that?
Well, a lack of paid sick days causes several problems. First, there's the obvious problem that it's bad for the employee, right? They're missing pay. Sometimes they get fired. And so that's something that we want to address. But the problem that, as opposed to the greater public, is the people who lack paid sick days are most likely to be in professions that have a high level of contact with the public. They serve us food. They take care of the elderly. They drive school buses. They work retail. So their germs become our germs.
Right.
There was a study that was done a few months ago that was released fairly recently that showed that 7 million people caught H1N1 at work from a sick coworker.
Wow.
Wow.
Right.
Undoubtedly, that would be reduced if people who were living paycheck to paycheck could afford to take a day off when they had gotten sick. That kind of.
So providing for one paid sick day could hypothetically keep there from being 100 sick days spread over 100 people.
That's probably an exaggeration, but diseases spread, and so when you're in contact with other people, it's not good. On top of that, a lack of paid sick days frequently poses one more barrier to people getting health care when they need it. To being able to get the preventative care or early treatment for whatever it is that they need. Whether it's women who need prenatal care, or people who have a cough that's later down the road going to develop into something much more serious. If you can't, Yeah, if you can't take a few hours off to go to the doctor early on, or a few days off to recover, then what you have is more likely to land you in the emergency room, more likely to put you in the hospital, and that costs all of us more.
Preventative medicine, and we talked about this on the shows we did.
Yeah.
It's preventative medicine, the idea of catching something early on to prevent a disease or an illness advancing, getting to advanced stages. And Emily, having lived in Italy, she can relate some of the benefits she saw in the Italian healthcare system, where they have socialized medicine.
Right. No, I'm just saying that it's free. You pay taxes. I mean, the money that you pay for taxes goes for paying for health care. So it's not you can't get health care if you don't have insurance. But I know that here you're talking about H1N1, and that in some workplaces they gave free immunizations or the vaccine. But even if people did get vaccine, they could still get the flu. You know, and that happened, you know, where I was working. You know, some people got the vaccine, but they still got the flu. So, you know, I just think you're right. People should be able to take a day off when they're sick and not worry about losing their jobs.
Everybody gets sick at some point, you know. It doesn't matter how much you wash your hands or how many vaccines you get. You know, everybody gets sick at one point. You know, I think one of the interesting things about the paid sick days issue is that it really has become a predominant issue in politics in Connecticut. And, you know, part of that is just because the voters of Connecticut are very receptive to it. You know, people get this issue at the grassroots level. It's important to people at the grassroots level. But it also is, you know, this issue gets asked about when there are gubernatorial debates without us even asking them to talk about our issue, and part that is in part because you know, candidates know that this is something we're going to be looking at them about, and they know that this is something that's essential to getting the Working Families Party endorsement.
So you plant the seed, so to speak, and make sure that you water it and germinate it within the candidates.
Yeah, I mean, we need to be clear about the things that are important to us. It doesn't work otherwise.
So when you choose a candidate to endorse, whether it's Democrat or Republican, what are can you give us some examples of people that you have endorsed and what issues you were looking at when you chose to endorse certain people?
I would say in 2008 we endorsed Jim Himes for Congress against Chris Shays, and you know there are a lot of factors why Jim Himes won, and when that seat had been so difficult for the Democrat to take in the past. We definitely like to think that we were one of the more important ones. There are a lot of factors, but we were one of them. And you know, out of 11,000 votes that he won by, he got 9,000 on our line. We did, you know, 20,000 doors knocked for that race, and talked to, you know, thousands and thousands of voters, which clearly helped towards that victory. Now, you know, we are happy that we helped elect him and get him into Congress. We don't always agree with what he does, but we do most of the time. And the important part about the strategy is that we have a relationship with that elected official because of the support that we gave him getting into office. And now when controversial issues come up, such as the Employee Free Choice Act, or you know, the public option, or you know, regulating the financial industry, he has an interest in our position on those issues.
So he keeps his door open to you.
Yes, and
that's excellent.
And likewise, you know, we're interested in making sure that that's a relationship that we can keep and endorse him in the future potentially. So we got almost 85,000 votes on our line in 2008, which is pretty exciting. It's 5.5%, almost 6% of the vote, and this is going to be an exciting year for us potentially, because you know the governor's races this year, a lot of the constitutional offices, and you know, we would like to get some good people in, and we would also like to make sure that we keep them good people once they're in office.
5 or 6%. That's really, in fact, more a wider margin than nearly any race is decided by anywhere. So 5% is a huge swing vote.
A lot of, most close races, I would say that's the margin in a lot
Very
of close
few.
races.
I bet that covers 80% of elections, probably less than 5% difference.
Maybe.
It really is. These are the days of razor-thin politics and razor-thin margins everywhere, it seems like, or almost everywhere.
And in some races in the legislature back in 2008, we actually were that margin of victory. The Democrats, in 3 cases that we cross-endorsed, had fewer votes on the Democratic line than their Republican opponents did, but they actually had more votes than their Republican opponent when you added the ones that came on our line.
And there are a couple of Republican minor parties. I think the Independent Party is traditionally a Republican Party. Libertarian generally.
When you say they're Republican, they're not Republican parties,
but they
have an ideology that makes
their ideology is similar, and they generally endorse Republicans. And it seems like the Working Families Party has grown to the point that it counterbalances that group of typically Republican-leaning parties, which is that speaks volumes about your party.
Well, no other third party got 85,000 votes in 2008.
That's a good chunk. That's a lot of votes.
Whoa.
I think one thing that's important, though, about us is, we actually poll best with unaffiliated voters. We tend to endorse Democrats. It's much rarer that we endorse Republicans. We're not going to tiptoe around that.
Right.
But we don't. Our votes are a small portion of some, I guess what you would say, progressive or liberal voters. But the majority, the real bulk of our votes are unaffiliated voters who are frustrated with the two-party system, who feel like their issues are not being met, who feel like this is just about insider politics and they are not participants. And this is a way for them to simultaneously vote for a candidate that they expect could actually win, and also make a statement with their vote. Vote for a set of issues instead of that individual. Vote for set a protest vote, but one that actually gets counted. I want to make sure that it's clear that we are less about the ideology behind these things. And I think that's one of the reasons that we are appealing to unaffiliated voters. Our position has typically been that the difference is not really between conservative and liberal. It's really between have and have not, or top and down. And it's about who has access to power and whether or not we're going to push for well-connected, wealthy business interests to have more access to our political system, or if we want to push for middle class and working class people to have more access.
So hypothetically, since at least working class whites tend more often to vote Republican, you stand a better chance perhaps of drawing more voters away from the Republican Party than actually the Democratic Party.
That's true. We were formed out of some activists at the grassroots level that really cared about us, some community organizations, and also labor unions. Labor unions are play a role in what we do as well. And in that way, we've gotten to the point where we can pull a lot of Republican votes towards Democratic candidates because
you give them the stamp of the endorsement is carries a lot of credence, obviously.
Right. This is the party that your union is supporting, and this is the guy that's good on these issues such as wages, such as health care, paid sick time, affordable housing, and that's who you should vote for.
Could you ever have a candidate from the Working Families Party run? You could have.
Yes,
right.
So we do that sometimes.
Okay.
When we feel that the two major parties are too disconnected from our goals.
Okay.
Or at least that the candidates in that race from the major parties are too disconnected from our goals, then we do run. did not form with the intention of being a spoiler party, but we're willing to do that when the circumstances are severe enough. And we also, in local races, and we've done this with a fair amount of success in Bridgeport and Hartford, when we've made a calculation that our base is strong enough and that we have a strong enough presence in the community to run our own candidates to win, then we'll do that too. This past fall, we elected 2 people to the Bridgeport Board of Education.
Sure.
And in Hartford, we are the second party in Hartford. We have folks there are twice as many city councilmen that are working families than there are Republican. We have a registrar of voters. We have folks on the Board of Education. And, we are the opposition party in Hartford.
That's the start of something big.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's the start of something very,
Sure.
very potent, very powerful.
Yeah. And, it remains to be seen whether folks will decide that is something that is going to be a regular component of our strategy. What we want to do is influence the way that people who win govern, and we can do that very effectively with cross endorsement. Even when we don't win, although we often do.
Winning is nice, but small victories are important also.
Well, when somebody votes on the Working Families line, it's not just a message sent to that one candidate. You can see how many votes come on our line, and that is a clear number to all candidates, to all politicians, and all of the districts about the number of people in their district that prioritize these economic justice issues, that care about the cost of energy, that care about the cost of health care and wages and things like that.
Now, winning, is there some threshold of getting a certain number of votes within a municipality that keeps the Working Families Party on the ballot going forward? Because last year I ran in Danbury and in Bethel as a 1% candidate, and by doing that, by getting 1% on any issue, on any, I think it was
a citywide race,
any citywide position, 1% gets the party on the ballot. I don't know whether it's forever or there's a time limit on how long it gets you on the ballot. But I did that for the Working Families Party, both in Danbury and Bethel. And don't even ask me how I ran in two cities at the same time.
This is all quirk of election law, but
yeah.
So we have to get 1% in a race to maintain our party status in that race, which we rarely get less than 2 or 3%. So that's not really. Once we're on, we're pretty much set.
Yeah, I got 9% in Danbury. That's because there's only one guy on the ballot, Dan Jowdy. 1 minute? Okay, good. We're going to wrap it up now. Closing thoughts. Look forward.
Yeah.
Take us forward into the future. Take us 5 years from now.
5 years
And where
from
will
now?
the Working Families Party be? What are your goals and how will you get there?
We want to continue to inject our issues into the political debate here in Connecticut, and to make sure that our politicians are focusing on making health care affordable, keeping wages, enough to support a family on, those kinds of things. And we're going to continue to talk to voters and get our message out there, because they're receptive and they're looking for an alternative. And continuing to build the percentage of the vote on our line is I think, our first goal.
That is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah. And if anyone wants to get involved in the party, how would someone get involved?
Sure. They can go to ct-workingfamilies.org and look from there.
Great. Thank you very much for joining us on Progressive Soup. Lindsay Farrell has joined Emily Volpatesta and I on a good discussion about the Working Families Party. Good night.
Good night.
So much
Thank
for
you,
being here,
Kevin.
Rick.
Thanks
We're
for
going to
having
be
us.
with you again next week. And with that, I thank you very much for being here on the program, Joy
Thank
and
you.
Rick. It's a pleasure.